There we go. Can you hear me okay? I can't tell whether I've got hearing aids or the speaker.
In and out, even again this morning.
Was it?
I don't know, something's wrong.
I don't know. The lapel, yeah. Well, I guess they'll check it out. Did everybody get a lesson sheet as you came in? Anybody need a lesson sheet? Let's see if we can get Steve. Well, I never know how many to make, so we'll see if they run out. We're in our third lesson, and this one is on the book of Exodus. I assume we had enough then. Okay. Thank you, Steve. Again, this is a book we are pretty sure was written by Moses. I'm not going to go over all of those details, but we covered that the first week, I guess it was. Let's see here. There we go. The name comes from, again, the Greek, from the Septuagint. And when they translated the Hebrew text into the Septuagint, into Greek, they took it from Exodus 19:1, and I'll just read it very quickly, where they get this name, Exodos in Greek. In the third month, after the children of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on the same day they came to the wilderness of Sinai, and it's the gone out. The Greek word exodos means a going out or a departure. Twice in the New Testament, it is, Jesus uses it once. It's translated decease or death, which is kind of interesting that the word for going out, but sometimes we refer to the dead as the dearly departed, don't we? Because they departed. And so that's how this word is used. However, in Hebrews 11:22, it's translated in the New King James Version as departure. Why they didn't call it Exodus, I don't know. I mean, that's what they were referring to, was the Exodus there in Hebrews 11:22. But they chose to do that. Shemot. That's the name in Hebrew. As I said earlier, the Hebrew name usually came from the first word or first couple of words in the Hebrew text. In this case, it comes from basically two words, Vele Shemot. Now these are the names, and Shemot is the plural for names. Kind of an interesting thing, but what I want us to get from this, I don't know how your translation starts. What's the very first word in the book of Exodus? Is it now? Anybody got and? Nobody. I'm sorry? I don't know. I'm asking you. Now in the King James, and so the New King James just kept on with that. ESV, I know somebody uses it. They just, and that's one of the things that frustrates me about the ESV, because there's a very important, that little, you probably didn't hear me say it with valet, there's a little V sound, at the very first of this sentence. And it's a conjunction, and it's and. It's literally and. They translate it now, but the reason that it's important is because it connects Genesis to Exodus. And that's why I think that little conjunction is so important. You know, sometimes we look at these little books as just, I can just read this book and throw it away, and then I can read this book, but it connects them. So we don't really see it like we would in the Hebrew, but at least the New King James and King James use now to connect the two. So it's important to me. What else do I want to talk about this word? Shem, name. If you ever go to Jerusalem, the Holocaust Museum is in Jerusalem is called Yad Vashem. There's that V sound, Yad Vashem, and it means a hand and a name, literally, a hand and a name. And hand in Hebrew can mean a memorial or a monument, because it's like a monument that's straight up, and it'd be like lifting your hand up. And so they also use the Hebrew name for Shem or Shem as a monument. And so in 2 Samuel 18:18, Absalom built a monument for himself, and it's called Absalom's hand. Absalom's yad is what it is in Hebrew. Okay, we'll go on. The date of the Exodus. Probably one of the most controversial things maybe in the Old Testament as far as dating is the date of the Exodus. The early date, which I adhere to, let me turn it on here. In my paper, I've got 1446. You'll see 1445. Here they have 1447. Somewhere in the mid-15th century, I think, is when they went out of Egypt. Another theory is it's at the end, towards the end of the 13th century. They put a very short time for the judges, I think. I just think that's too short for the judges, but there are some very smart scholars who will defend this. But I think this allows more time for the judges and several other things, several other events to occur. So that's all I'm going to say about the dating, because it's, if you want to research it yourself, you're welcome to read all the stuff, but it's hard to make sense. Now, there's another reason that I believe in the early date of the Exodus. You remember Joseph was made the number 2 guy in all of Egypt. Can you think of any foreign country that you could go to that they would make you the number 2 person in the nation? Not likely. Not likely. I can't imagine. So why were they willing to make Joseph in a foreign country the number 2 man? I mean, he interpreted the Pharaoh's dream. I realize that, and he gave him a solution to the what was going to happen. But again, to make him the vice president of the country is pretty unreal, isn't it? Well, one of the reasons is, and I don't think I put a graphic on, I couldn't find a good graphic for this. That Egypt has dynasties, and the 15th dynasty went from like the 17th to the 16th century for a little over 100 years. And instead of having Egyptian pharaohs, they had foreign pharaohs called the Hyksos. And they had sailed down. Some people think they were already living there in Egypt, and they were able to do an uprising and become powerful. Others believe they invaded Egypt and sailed down and invaded Egypt. I don't know. But the Hyksos were foreigners, but they were also Semitic, like the Jews. They were Semites, or descendants of Shem, if that helps you. And so that may explain why they would allow another foreigner to be the number 2 man. If that is true, if that theory is true, it was during this period, earlier back with Joseph, that would fit into the dating of Joseph being the number 2 man. It also gives time from the time the Hyksos lost power to where the Egyptians came in, and the Egyptians would see these Israelites around there and say, uh-oh, we're in trouble. If they ever ally with our enemies, they could defeat us again. And so when a Pharaoh arose who knew not Joseph, probably an Egyptian by that time. That's just something about the Hyksos and the period. But again, I go with this earlier one. The Hyksos, 1638 to 1530 BC. One of the reasons I didn't put a graphic up is there are no really good graphics without putting every dynasty of the Egyptians up there, because they don't have all the names of the Hyksos rulers, and so I couldn't find a good graphic for that. Let's go to the next slide. 2 simple outlines of Exodus. I like this one. This is my speed. First 13 chapters are through verse 16. Israel was in Egypt, Israel in the wilderness for their wanderings, and then from Sinai to the end of the book through chapter 40. This one, the good thing about this one is it breaks down this latter period, the covenant and the commandments, and then the building of the tabernacle. So that's just two easy outlines that you can use for the book of Exodus. After the Lord made his covenant with Abraham, or back in Genesis 15:13, I've always found it interesting that God is making this covenant with Abraham, or Abram, and he's made this great promise to Abram. And then there in chapter 15, Abram has to do this cutting up animals and walking down through it and all this stuff. And God makes this covenant with Abram. But he says, your descendants are going to go into another place for 400 years, predicting the slavery time in Egypt. And I've always found that very interesting, that he did that. But when the children of Israel become enslaved in Egypt, they start groaning. And as we pick up in Exodus 2, 24 and 25, so God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God acknowledged them. There are certain words that come up in the Old Testament and in Hebrew, and one of those is remember. And here is a good example. The Hebrew word is zakar. Zakar. God remembered his covenant. And as you read through the Old Testament, so many times God remembered his covenant with his people and did not destroy them. He delivered them out of Babylon. God remembered his people. And so that's a very important word in Hebrew. At the same time that he remembered them, what else is happening? Well, he's going to deliver them, but how's he going to deliver them? Who's going to be the Moses? And Moses isn't somebody he just picked out of the blue and all of a sudden he's leading the children of Israel. Moses, if you just reflect on being rescued by a princess, he gets the best education available, learns how to read and write. He gets military training because as a prince, he would be also a warrior. And so God, knowing he's going to deliver them, he's got Moses prepared to lead the children of Israel. And again, it's another one of those providential things that God is always working with his people. Well, I don't know where we're going. It's the plagues. There we go. The 10 plagues. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the plagues. You can read those, but the first 9 really took their toll, but it was the 10th one that finally convinced Pharaoh to let the children of Israel go. I put something in here that I found very interesting. Sometimes people try to align each one of these plagues with an Egyptian god. I'm going to tell you, if I listed all the Egyptian gods, it'd take about 4 or 5 slides to put them in just close order up and down. I think John Walton, he's kind of gone off the deep end as a scholar, but at one time he wrote some very good things, and one of the things he wrote, although many biblical scholars attempt to identify a particular deity as the object of each of the 10 plagues, it seems better to understand the plagues collectively as judgment against the whole pantheon of Egyptian gods. And I think as you read through Exodus, you'll find a statement very similar to that about it wasn't just one deity, it was against the whole, all the Egyptian gods. So I think they're correct there. Okay, we get to the 10th plague and the death of the firstborn. And with this night when the firstborn is going to be killed is the Passover instituted. And some very specific guidance is given about the Passover, about when it's to be done, when they're supposed to kill the lamb, how they're supposed to cook it. It all has to be eaten that night. You can't have leftovers the next day. They have to eat like they're fixing to leave, so they have unleavened bread as something made in a hurry. And they stand up to eat. like they're ready to start marching. So we have the first Passover, and we could sit here for probably a week and talk about all the resemblance with the New Testament, the killing of the firstborn, the Passover meal, the Lord's Supper, Christ's death, the perfect sacrifice. I mean, just on and on and on. What I want us to get is just an awareness of how this last plague fits in with the death of the firstborn, and then how it impacts us today in what we do. We observe the Passover like Jesus did or wanted his disciples to do in a totally new way with just unleavened bread. They never talk about fruit of the vine in a Passover meal, do they? That's something that came about later, but Jesus used it as part of the Lord's Supper. So it's all very interesting how all of this stuff from the Exodus fits into what we do today. I think it's very interesting. Okay, so the children of Israel observe the Passover. They borrow all this stuff from their Egyptian people to make them rich. Basically, they went out with a lot of loot, enough to build the tabernacle with all the gold. Just think of the gold that's in that tabernacle and where they got it. Very, very interesting. Let's see if we can go on to the next slide. So we got 10 plagues, and now we got 10 commandments. And 2 sections, the first 4, relationship to God, the last 6, relationships to other people. That's one way of dividing them. And you can either read what they say up here, or you can read this more modern reading of the 10 Commandments in the paper. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Possible root of the Exodus. Again, this is so debated, because most of the modern scholars, a lot of them think they didn't ever cross the Red Sea. They went through the Reed Sea. They just kind of sloshed through the swamp. I don't know when all of that really started, but I believe what the book says, that it divided the Red Sea, and it was deep enough to where it drowned the entire army of Pharaoh. And a swamp doesn't do that. It takes but they bring it down up here in the northern part of the Red Sea. And maybe that's right. We do know that they came down this way, staying fairly close to the coast, and then finally ended up about 48 days later at Mount Sinai. And there, when they arrive there in about chapter 19, they're going to stay there for a while, at least basically through the end of the book of Exodus, although it tells them to get ready to depart from Sinai. But they're going to be down at Mount Sinai. And the Lord gives a bunch of things are going to happen. First, he starts talking to the people from Mount Sinai. And then he has Moses come up to him. And Moses goes up there, and he spends 40 days on the mountain, and the Lord gives him the 10 Commandments on the tablets of stone. But during, somewhere in all of this, he also gives him those other commandments. And we talked about this morning, 613 commands. Well, if you read there, starting in Exodus chapter 20, you'll see some of those other commands that the Lord gave to Moses. But when Moses finally goes up on the mountain and stays for 40 days, in chapter 32, we have the golden calf incident. And Moses is gone, I don't know how long at that point, but they said Moses must be dead, so they built the calf. It's just, in retrospect, it's just hard to believe that they fell back into idolatry that quickly, but they did. Before we get to chapter 32, the Lord has started telling Moses how to build the tabernacle. He's told him about the priesthood. The Aaronic priesthood is ordained, and then we have the golden calf incident, and then we return to the building of the tabernacle, and that continues down through basically chapter 39. And in chapter 39, well, I guess we ought to talk about the tabernacle a little bit. I find this diagram, if you read all the details, it is so detailed. Even the little tent pegs and the way they fasten the boards together and the different materials used to build the entire thing. But this up here is the size of our football field, an American football field. This is the size of the tabernacle, which I find very interesting. I always thought that the tabernacle was a lot bigger because you read the directions for it and it sounds like it's massive, but actually it fits in, it looks almost like you could turn it this way and it'd fit in the end zone almost. It's just not that big. Yes, Patrick?
The 600 or so odd commandments, was Moses given some type of miraculous mental capacity, or were those written down?
Eventually they were written down, but it may have been God told him to write them down. I don't know, Patrick. We don't know. We just know that they're all written down there because people have gone through and counted in the books. But how Moses got it or recorded it or had a copy, I don't know. I don't know.
I can read some of the instructions about the tabernacle. Walk away. I can't replay anything I read. You can tell that's just a capsule for what Moses did.
All I know is when I read the first chapter of Joshua, God tells Joshua, you better do everything I've told you to do. So they must have had a copy, and they must have read it quite frequently, which is another reason we need to study our Bibles more. Let's go to the next slide. The furniture. Each of these are made, and then the ones that are overlaid with gold. This one, the Ark of the Covenant, the mercy seat, the cherubim, where God dwelt in the Holy of Holies or most holy place. Very important. All of them are important, but that was very, very important for the children of Israel. Let's see what else I want to give you. Let's go to the next slide. Again, I was trying to think of things that are important from from the book of Exodus. All of it's important, but when you're doing this, you can't cover every incident in the book of Exodus. But this one, I think, is very important. After he gives all these details, thus all the work of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting was finished, and the children of Israel did according to all that the Lord had commanded Moses, so they did. Remember when Noah built the ark? A couple of times it says, and Noah did what God commanded him to do, basically. And here we have this place that's going to be the place of worship, where God is going to dwell between the cherubim. And we have that statement, all that the Lord had commanded Moses. I think anytime we're talking about worship, anytime we're talking about doing what God says, pretty important to do everything God tells us to do, and not make up stuff. What else do you think from the book of Exodus? It's hard to cover these books in 30 minutes. Any comments?
Remind me what happened to the Ark of the Covenant.
That comes later.
You said that, a question about Exodus?
Yeah, it comes much later. It's, well, there's a funny story about that I'll have to tell you some other time, but it's not the Raiders of the Lost Ark or...
Yeah, I was thinking it might have been fictional.
Yeah, it's... A good time would be maybe the destruction of the temple in 586 BC. Might be a good time. I don't know. It might be a good time to do that. Anybody else? Yes.
Talking about Passover, growing up, I always thought this was dead. And, you know, it says God. So, where, do you have any idea where that came in? I mean, where did that idea come from?
I'll have to get back to you, but there is a reference somewhere that would lead you to believe that an angel had the hand in it, but nowhere is it called a death angel, if that makes sense. Well, yeah, it says it Lord, but there is a place in the Old Testament, and I'll have to go find it, but if I'm not mistaken, it has a reference to that, and it may be in the Psalms, but it's somewhere where it talks about that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. We'll pick up next week.